Hi there, welcome to Alpine Bravo. My name is Brendan and this is my channel for all things Microsoft Flight Simulator. Today in this video we'll be carrying on with our series of tutorials on the magnificent Daher Kodiak 100 by Simworks Studio, and we'll be looking at the taxi and before takeoff checklist and having a discussion about ground handling. We'll also be having a look at how the aircraft handles and turns on unprepared strips with inclines. So let's hop into the cockpit, carry on from where we left off, having our engine started and get ready for taxi. So we've got the engine started, ready for the next phase in the checklist procedure. But before we start to work through that, I'll just mention a couple of things. I will bring up a neat little tool called an input viewer. This is available on flightsim.to for free, and it allows us to see on the screen when we are inputting controls. So if actually I zoom back out so we can just see the yoke there. So we can see as I push the yoke forward, pull it back, we're getting an indicator as well as the value reading. There are the ailerons, there's the rudder, and left toe brake, right toe brake. You'll also get the power lever indicating on the left hand side there as well. Bring that up, we can see. So it just helps give you some really good feedback on what's going on, and it'll help you as viewers see what inputs I'm making and how strong those inputs are. It's very good as well if you suspect that you've got some sort of bug or some not correct behaviour with your peripheral. It's good for that, and I don't use it to fly around normally, but if I'm doing training, learning a new plane, flying circuits, trying to get the handle on a particular aircraft, then it's a really useful tool. Because we're going to taxi today, I came down to this slightly larger airport, Bob Hope, in Burbank, California. And here's the Navigraph chart of it. I'll just bring our position up. And you can see we're currently located there, and we'll be taxiing as if we were going to go and do some local VFR operations or stay in the pattern. And it's likely that we're going to get, there's no wind at the moment. We'll dilate this on the radio in just a second, but there's no wind at the moment, I know, from the METAR, and so it's likely that we'll get runway 26, in which case it would be Bravo, Delta, cross runway 15, Delta, Delta 1. That's what we can expect, and it's always a good idea to try and plan your taxi route in advance, particularly if you're flying on VATSIM. Based on what you think you're likely to get. If you don't have a Navigraph subscription, you can also use a little nav map. Will give you, if you zoom right in, you'll see taxiway assignments as they are in the simulator, which may differ from as they are in reality, but also all of these charts for the US are available for free via SkyVector. And you can get most of them in Europe as well, quite readily via the various real-world publications, and that's really invaluable if you are flying on VATSIM. There's also ChartFox as well, as chartfox.com I think it is. I'll put a link in the description, and that's a central way of accessing a lot of those freely published and available real-world charts. So let's get our ATIS.
Burbank Airport information, Golf 2200 Zulu. Wind calm. Visibility 10. Sky condition, clear. Temperature, 19er. Dew point, 10. Altimeter tree 0.21. ILS Yankee runway 8 in use. Landing and departing runway 26. VFR aircraft say direction of flight. All aircraft read back hold short instructions. Advise controller on initial contact you have golf.
Okay, so we've got information golf on board, and just a couple of little things that I've done. So I've got 3025 dialed in. That was what the pressure was a little while ago. It's now down to 21, so we'll just bring it down. And I know the airport is at an elevation of 723 feet, but there's some variation over the whole airfield. We'll just minimize the input view for now, and we will bring up our checklist. And we'll go straight to taxi where we left off last. So working our way through the checklist now, we're going to test brakes. And when we remove the, I've still got the parking brake on, but as soon as I remove the parking brake, we will have the brakes applied. Even in low idle, the Kodiak can, if it's lightly loaded, taxi or start to move with no throttle applied. Flight controls positioned according to wind. Well, there is no wind, but if there was a wind, we would position the upwind. We'd operate the ailerons into the upwind. So for example, if we had quite a strong right hand wind coming in here, we'd position the ailerons like such, and that helps prevent the wind from being lifted by that wind. How much you'll need will depend very much on how strong the wind is. Our flight instruments, we'll check when we're taxiing, everything's set. Our engine inlet bypass is normal, which is fine on a big airport like this. It is preferred to use keep it in normal if possible, because it reduces the just allows for better ram air inlet recovery rates and lower operating temperatures in the engine than when it's in bypass. So okay, well that completes that checklist. So we'll now look at our taxi, and we will request a taxi to remain in the pattern.
Burbank Ground November for 9er 3 Kilo with hotel request taxi for takeoff touch and go.
November 49er 3 Kilo taxi 2 and hold short of runway 26 using taxiway Bravo Delta cross runway 15 Delta Delta 1. Contact tower on 118.7 when ready.
Okay, we'll just acknowledge
Taxiing
that.
hold short runway 26 via taxiway Bravo Delta cross runway 15 Delta Delta 19er 3 Kilo.
Okay, so those taxiway instructions were exactly as we thought they would be from the chart. So it is Bravo Delta cross 115 Delta Delta 1. So we can get off the ramp either here or at Bravo 3 here. Probably take Bravo 3 just simply because we've got this cart. Oh, it's got some ground personnel over there as well. Anyway, just obviously you're checking your surroundings. Before we start taxiing, a couple of things I'll mention as well. In the previous tutorials I've heard talk about the throttle, beta range. Now beta range comes in two parts. What it is, once you cross the gate, there's a gate at the idle mark, and once you get past that gate, I'll just reposition the view so you can see it here. You've got two parts. You've got beta, and what that does is put the prop into a fine pitch, so it produces less power, and you would use that on the ground for taxiing, and it's the only time you would use the beta range in the Kodiak, unlike in some of our turboprops like the PC6 Turbo Porter, where you would use beta in the air, or indeed the Twin Otter as well. And as you continue to pull the throttle back, it will change the pitch of the prop ever further till it will start to produce reverse thrust, and that will be accompanied by a distinct change in tone. in the engine, and let's just hear what that sounds like. So that's in beta. Let's say you would use that for taxiing, but you can hear the change of tone now as I pull it further back and into reverse, and that's what you would use to help you achieve shorter landing distances on short field operations, or say if it was windy and you just wanted to get it stopped. Now a little word on operating the throttle if you don't have it on an axis. I find the best thing to do is to highlight it, and then without holding any mouse button down, using the mouse wheel, bring it backwards and forwards. And the same, although it's a bit slow with the prop lever, but if you want that finer control, use the mouse wheel rather than clicking and dragging. Also, just for the views, you can use your hat switch with quick views to look around. You can use pre-programmed views to look left and right, or you can use free look with the mouse. Lots of ways of checking your surroundings, and another way of doing it is to have a head tracking software like this, which is absolutely fantastic, and that's what I'm going to be using for this short taxi. So we got our taxi clearance. I'm going to apply the toe brakes, parking brakes released, and just advance the throttle. Starting to move, looking out for obstacles and personnel, and once it gets going, Kodiak will move, so it doesn't need a lot once you've broken the static resistance. Now for turning, I'll bring up the input viewer now so you can see what rudder inputs I'm putting in, not requiring that much. You can increase your radius of turn with the toe brake. The nose wheel steering allows up to 13.5 degrees, and then you can increase that with differential braking. So if I'm turning right and I want to turn tighter, I start applying a bit of right brake, but just be aware that will slow you down as well. Now in terms of speeds, 13 knots, we don't really want to go any faster than that, so I'm going to bring it into that beta range. Which just helps reduce the amount of power going through to the engine. Taxi on the straight on taxiways, I wouldn't want to go much faster than 20 knots on a paved surface, slower if it is unpaved. And coming into corners, certainly no faster than 10 knots, otherwise you do run the risk of tipping a wing. Now there's no traffic at the moment, which is making it easier, don't have to worry about that in some ways. But here we are coming up on Delta, and you can see there's the old short for runway 15. Now we have permission to cross runway 15 already. So we'll just swing on, but as we swing on, landing lights on and taxi lights on for the crossing, just to help improve visibility and being absolutely certain that there's nothing coming in, nothing that way. Okay, that's all good to cross. Checking out the windsock there, I think we can go a bit faster. Yeah, it is down to 5 knots now, maybe there's a little bit of an upslope here. Now using the throttle with a mouse is pretty difficult. It might be necessary in VR, but certainly get a mouse with a wheel if at all possible and use the lock mode. It's a lot easier than clicking and dragging. And we're up to 14 knots. Just bring it back again. And all the while, you've got a little bit of left turning tendency from the torque, but very little. See, I'm just putting in very occasional left rudder inputs as well. I think that's actually from some, so like a 1 knot wind from the right, and judging by that windsock, and that's probably slight weather vaning, which I'll talk about in the next segment of the tutorial when I'm going to repeat this taxi, except we're going to put some wind in. And there we are, the hold short for Delta 1 for runway 26. Okay, so there we are, parking brake on, and we will run that again, except this time with some wind. So thanks to the magic of the simulator, we're right back at where we started, except this time we've got some wind of 15 knots, gusting 18 from 180. And we'll just see what effect that has on how the aircraft handles. All the other conditions though are the same. So brakes, test. Now our flight controls position to the wind. Now the wind is coming from the south, so I'm going to put in some left aileron. Flight instruments checked, engine inlet remains bypass. Okay, and we're going to release our parking brake, release our toe brakes, and bring the throttle forward. So that was interesting, just seeing what was going on there. Basically, the wind was strong enough to start spinning us on our axis. Let's get the head tracking going. Did we miss? We did. The weather vaning is really over powerful in Microsoft Flight Simulator. That's basically when the pressure of the wind on the tail, the vertical stabilizer, starts to make the aircraft pivot all around the wheels, so the nose always turns into the wind, and that's what was happening there, overcoming the friction of the tires. Now I'm pretty sure that wouldn't have happened, not with a 15 knot wind. It's a really good example of how it's exaggerated. Now, maintaining steady left pressure, again you would expect with torque and other effects from the engine, prop wash, to have to put in a bit of right rudder when you're taxiing, but just bring that down into beta. But such as I'm doing 156 degrees on this taxiway, so I've got a little bit of wind coming from the right, and I'm needing left rudder to compensate for that. 7 knot ground speed, beta doing its thing. Let's bring it back up again. Now I haven't yet figured out how to get a binding that will allow you to use beta on a prop axis. Now as we're turning on to delta here, we're going to get a straight crosswind striking the aircraft, and that is going to want to weather vane us to the right. Now 15 knots is the maximum. Here's the hold short, so landing lights on, strobes on. 50 knots is the maximum. Demonstrate crosswind for the Kodiak for takeoff. Now I'm not getting, it's interesting because I'm not getting any wing lift here, I'm not having to use any aileron to keep the aircraft level. Strobes and landing lights off. But I'm having to maintain a degree, you know, a bit of rudder pressure. Not that much actually. And I'm starting to wonder if SWS have taken advantage of some of the new variables that were introduced, I think, in Sim Update 9 to allow developers to basically increase the friction component of the tires, which was the thing that was lacking for all the simulator aircraft, and would allow this tremendous weather veining to take place. You can still encounter some quite bad weather veining on touchdown, when you sort of seem to suddenly transition to ground-based physics or ground-based effects, which can make for some snaky landings. But right now, I have to say, for a 15 knot crosswind, I'm finding it very easy to control the aircraft. But of course, this is where getting the correct sensitivity settings for your peripheral really helps, and having a good set of rudder pedals. So just a little bit of braking. And there we are at our hold short. So perfectly easy to control. Now, and the point is this, that you wouldn't be taking off in a wind any stronger than that. So if it is stronger than that and it's going to be a crosswind, which it is on this case, you know, should you be flying is the question that you're going to have to ask yourself. So anyway, that's taxiing with a bit of wind, and we'll move on to the next part of the tutorial, and we will go through our next checklist, which will be the before takeoff checklist. So I'll just set my parking brake right now. So here we are with the before takeoff checklist, and the parking brake is set. Get that ticked. Seat belts, check secure, and now we lock the inertial reel lever. Check the compartment for loose items, everything's secure. Now, really important, make sure that the flight controls are free and correct. Now, the input viewer is a great way of confirming, but we're also looking physically. So that is the elevator free and correct, ailerons free and correct, rudders free and correct, and we're moving into full motion. It is always worth doing this because you can, you know, your peripherals can bug. Things can get disconnected. Sometimes Microsoft Flight Simulator does weird things and they lock up, so always check, particularly if you're flying on VATSIM or something like that. So flight controls free and correct. Our flight instruments checked, just making sure that everything, you know, no red boxes, and we've got our target altitude set 1700 feet, which is pattern altitude for Burbank. We have our autopilot modes armed in there, and that's really for the flight director. And here's an interesting thing I'll just point out. So when you are in beta range, you will get beta indication there. So I'm clearly still got, I need to, there we go, and that's a good way of making sure that you're down and idle. So flight instruments set, fuel selectors, just check left and right are still on, yep, and you get a little red light on the dashboard above the PFD if they weren't. Our fuel shut-off valve is push to open, check, fuel quantity, check, and we would probably make a note of the actual value here. Our flaps, certainly if it's a windy conditions, as it is at the minute, you wouldn't taxi with your flaps in, so we set them here, and it's 20 for normal takeoff. And again, no, it's a maximum demonstrate crosswind, so actually I would set it to 10. Trims, okay, no elevator trim set. Rudder trim is set. Now a little bit of word, you always check the trims before takeoff, again, even if you set them before, because particularly in windy conditions, because the automatic trim compensation system can get activated if the sensors read an airspeed above 35 knots, which with a strong enough gust and your move, so say you're doing taxiing at 20 knots and you get a gust of 15 or wind of 15 knots on the nose, that's 35. It'll only take a gust, and then that may activate that system and it may alter your trim, so you always check before takeoff. Engine inlet system check, we will make sure that the parking brake is on, so you bring the throttle forward to minimum of 300. So checking that we've got now got 24 volts. In fact, if we click system, you can see a generator, and we've got 24 volt minimum, and we've got 27. And I believe actually 26 is what you are looking for. Now the overspeed governor test would be next. That's located here. It's currently inoperative, but that's just a system to make sure that the prop doesn't go into too high RPM. Power lever, back to idle, not into beta. That is in beta. There we go. Quadrant friction lock, adjust if necessary. It's not modelled, so don't need to worry about it. Inertial separator is still normal. Pitot heats we would turn on at this point if it was required, which would be below 5 degrees and with visible moisture. Neither of those apply. Our avionics, we're squawking 1200 on standby, so at this point we want to get our transponder on altitude mode, squawking 1200. Our CDI is set. Annunciators check, we've only got the bypass annunciator, all of our annunciators are good. So our strobes go on at this point, and I would actually also put my landing lights on at this point. Parking brake, we would, well, I'm going to apply the toe brakes always when first releasing the parking brake, and actually do them twice because sometimes they don't engage properly first time. So prop, max RPM, condition lever, idle, and that is the before takeoff checklist complete. So for the final segment on this, I'm just going to go back to showing you a little bit of operations, ground handling, not on a big prepared paved strip like this, in fact with some rough ground and some steep slopes, and let's see how the Kodiak handles that. So here we are for something completely different. We are in Papua New Guinea at the very small high landing strip of Nambayufa. That's Alpha Yankee November Yankee, which is at 5,551 feet, and the little nav map tells me it's got a grass strip of 148 feet and on quite an incline. How steep? Hard to say. 5-6 degrees, maybe more than that. I had an alignment failure when I started the engine. The air data computers weren't entirely happy at not being on a a level slope, and you can see I'm in a reasonably tight spot. I've got this H145, a fancy ride, just parked to my right, and then we've got these ground handling guys who managed to drag a pushback car all the way up here. Not very realistic, but there's also those trees there now, so I'm not going to push back because that's totally unrealistic. The helicopter is not going to move and is a very expensive object, so the trees the guys can move out the way. They won't, of course, but they could if they really cared. But what I'll do is I'll taxi with and just try and pivot using differential braking and plenty of torque to just pivot round to the left here and taxi over to just to the right of that hut before the trees, and then pivot again to get lined up on the runway. I'm not going to do a takeoff, this is just to show you ground handling in what are fairly tricky conditions. To get a sense of the angle that we're sitting at there, now we're in the cockpit, I'm just going to pop the head tracking on. Have a good look. Right, our parking brake is set. Bring the prop full forward. Now, I'm not going to be using beta. I'm going to bring the parking brake off. Test brakes. Yep. Instruments are set. I mean, I'm not squawking, but I would do that when I get up there. So this is really just to see how it handles. Oh, and just before I go, I'll bring the input viewer up. See what that looks like. I'm afraid the ground crew will get minced, but what can you do? About 270. Okay. There we go. And you see, bit of differential braking. Ground crew aren't going to get minced, just have to duck their head. So turning on the spot. Right. So I'm not going to aim right at the end of the strip, I'll aim just to the right of it. Now, one thing to be aware of is that because I'm actually, if you look at the PFD, you can see I've got an angle of attack of about 5 degrees, and the Kodiak will cope with that, but what you'll get is, there's no wind at the moment, it's clear skies, no wind, weather setting, but the high angle of attack leads to greater P factor, which means you'll get more of a left turning tendency, and it will manifest itself on steep slopes. So try not to clip these trees, and let's get ourselves, what do you reckon? You reckon we're good there? I reckon we're good there. God, gonna have to come and do some more flying in PNG. Look at those mountains. I mean, I'm at 5,500 feet here. And it would be hot as well, of course. So there we are, easy peasy. I'm sure there are tougher, steeper, tighter strips, certainly quite a lot of strips in Alaska or places where there's a lot of heavy vegetation. They can be really narrow and tight. This is actually relatively easy to maneuver in, but that gives you a sense of the Kodiak's ground handling capabilities, and the ability to use differential braking really does make a tremendous difference. So that concludes today's tutorial. Farewell from sunny Papua New Guinea. Please do hit subscribe and like if you enjoyed this, and the next tutorial we will finally get airborne and we will be looking at takeoffs. So thank you very much for watching.